After a few minutes, Tutor slowly began to regain consciousness. He opened his eyes and couldn't help but be shocked. He was lying on the ground and was surrounded by players from his team who had come over to see if he was okay. He started looking around and saw that everyone was very worried about him, even the girls. He didn't know what was happening or if he had fainted. He thought that maybe he had fallen asleep during the game. Once he fully regained consciousness, he remembered that he was going to bother Theory Rank 1 Vikir by bumping a little against his shoulder, but Tutor didn't remember what had happened afterward. He began to sit up and saw Vikir, who was standing dusting himself off. Seeing this, it didn't take him long to realize that during that physical fight with the nerd Vikir, he had fainted. After dusting off his knees, Vikir started dusting off his shoulders. Tutor couldn't believe that he had lost against someone like Vikir. He gritted his teeth in frustration and decided to try it again. The run flat match continued its course and the players from both teams prepared to keep playing. The players gave the ball to Tutor. The triplets stood in front and got ready to take the ball away from him, while on the other side Vikir, who was standing behind them, simply stayed still. Tutor's gaze fixed on Vikir. He knew something was wrong, so he decided to do it again. Bianca and Sinclair started to watch the game, and they couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and surprised at the same time since they didn't know what was happening. Instead of heading towards the enemy base, Tutor began running towards Vikir and the triplets, leaving everyone confused. Tutor started staring at them, and with a look full of determination, he caught their attention. The triplets became furious and decided not to let him pass through them. They lunged at Tutor and tried to stop him and take the ball away from him. But Tutor started moving at high speed and without much effort evaded the triplets, leaving them in shock. Now that the path was clear, with an angry look, he began running towards Vikir. Vikir, who was standing still, had told the triplets to keep Tutor away from him. He didn't know why he kept approaching him. Tutor began to stare intently at Vikir. For him, there was no way this could be a coincidence. He decided it was time to use the best skill he had. He used the Azure Spearman family's run-flat secret technique called Saint Spear Tackle. He started running even faster towards Vikir, and his eyes began to shine, and the giant spirit of a spearman appeared behind him. With this attack, Tutor was determined to take down Vikir. While slowly he was getting closer, Vikir simply remained calm and didn't even move. Several minutes later, a gray-haired boy with scars on his face and crossed arms named Sancho asked Tutor if he was awake. Once again, Tutor was lying on the ground because he had fainted again. Upon realizing this, he became alert as he did not know what had happened. Quickly, he sat up, put his hand on top of his head and panicked when he realized that he had fainted again. With a calm look, Sancho asked him to calm down. Then, he began to look at Tutor with a serene gaze and revealed that after hitting Vikir with a high-speed tackle, he had bounced off him at great speed and had flown into the air. He turned his back on Tutor, started putting on the equipment. He could understand why Tutor was focusing on Vikir. He knew that he was definitely hiding something. He decided to go against him this time. Upon hearing what Sancho had just said, Tutor, who was sitting behind him, was somewhat surprised. While the fierce match continued its course, Sancho began to walk towards Vikir. His friend had been deceived twice. He couldn't just stand by doing nothing. Sancho Barataria was an exchange student who had come from the Mercenary Guild Association in the north. He picked up the ball that was on the ground. Due to his overwhelming physique, he wasn't considered eligible for his age group in his league, so he had decided not to play run flat. He grabbed the ball with both hands, started staring intently at Vikir. On the frozen land of the north, the newborns of the elders who were on the brink of death fought desperately. It meant that they were all warriors. The triplets became fearful again, clenched their teeth tightly, and with a determined look decided not to let him pass this time. While Sancho's eyes were shining, he began running towards the triplets and using his arm pushed all three aside without much effort. The bodies of the triplets were thrown backwards and passed by Vikir, who simply stood still in silence. Seeing that the triplets couldn't keep anyone away from Vikir, he began to stare at them with a piercing gaze and asked if they wanted to die. Feeling his gaze, the triplets started crying and begged him for forgiveness. While Vikir was distracted, Sancho began advancing quickly towards him with the intention of knocking him down. He was moving at such a high speed that he was destroying the field and creating a smoke screen. He began to stare at Vikir, clenched his teeth tightly, and decided it was time to end this. While he was slowly approaching, Vikir simply remained calm and didn't even move from the spot. Sancho extended his hand backward and prepared to strike Vikir with all his power, intending to see if he could withstand all of his strength. Using the momentum, he struck Vikir in the abdomen with all his might. Several seconds passed and nothing happened. For Sancho, it was as if he had hit a mountain. Upon seeing that Vicar hadn't even moved an inch, Sancho couldn't help but start trembling and sweating profusely in confusion. Seeing Sancho's expression, Vicar decided to play along with him. He lifted his feet off the ground, and not long after, his body was forcefully thrown backward, leaving poor Sancho shocked and unable to understand what had just happened. To avoid appearing as if he were faking it, Vicar's body fell several meters back. Upon seeing that Sancho had been able to break through the enemy team's defense, the spectators were astonished. Some began to worry about Vicar since they didn't know if he was dead. But others didn't care because at this rate, Classe was going to win. Sancho's hand was trembling. He started looking at his hand with a shocked expression. He had felt as if Vicar wasn't human. Sancho's hand began to tremble even more, and while he was trying to process the situation, one of the triplets stealthily appeared behind him and prepared to snatch the ball from him. Just before Sancho could realize, the triplet took the ball from him and started running towards the enemy base to score a goal. Sancho turned around, and upon seeing that he was going to score, he couldn't help but panic and think that this wasn't good. Now that the path was clear, the triplet scored a goal and the referee blew his whistle indicating that Class B had won. The triplets and the players of Team B started celebrating the victory and couldn't help but feel happy. All the players began to praise the triplets and started tossing them into the air. The result of the match was 0-1, so Class B had won. Now that the game had come to an end, Vicar stood up and began dusting off his clothes. At that moment, someone appeared behind him and using a bottle began pouring water over Vicar's head, leaving him somewhat confused. This was none other than Sancho. Several seconds later, once the bottle was empty, he began to smile and explain that Vicar was the secret contributor to Class B's victory, so he shouldn't just stand here. Tutor, who had his arms resting on his waist, simply started smiling, thinking that Sancho was right. He approached Vicar, rested his arm on his shoulder, and with a cheerful smile asked him to be happier since his victory had made him retire. He wanted to teach Vicar a lesson during practical classes because he was jealous of him, but now he had realized how embarrassing that was, so he apologized. Vicar, who had his head wet, started looking at him and remained silent. Sancho appeared on the other side of him, put his hand on Vicar's shoulder, and with a cheerful smile asked him what exercise he was doing since he had a solid build. He thought that he had used mana. Although at first Vicar remained silent, then he took off the equipment from his head and with a sincere look explained that he was a commoner so he couldn't use mana. Upon hearing this, Tutor extended his hand towards him and thought it was a shame because with such a blessed body, if he'd received proper training, he'd have been an expert like himself. While they were talking, 3 girls who were holding towels appeared and caught their attention by saying that they could use these towels to dry off the sweat. Upon hearing their voices, Tutor turned around, and when he saw that they had brought towels, he couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised. While Sancho was handing a towel to Vicar, Tutor turned his back on them and started walking away with the girls, thinking that his classmates were the best. After giving the towel to Vicar, Sancho went over to Tutor and both of them started talking among themselves. The Azure Spearman family's hero, Tutor, and the mercenary guild's ace, Sancho. They were going to become heroes who would save humanity by hunting an infinite number of demons during the time of the fall. Vicar took off his glasses and couldn't help but start smiling, as it was strange to think that they had a past like this. Seeing Vicar without glasses, Sancho and Tutor were left speechless, while on the other side Bianca, Sinclair, and the other girls couldn't help but start blushing. Vicar took off his glasses and started wiping his head with the towel. After wiping off the sweat, he put the towel around his neck and began to look to one side. According to the girls, he was very handsome. But our Vicar did not know that his days at the academy were about to become problematic from this moment on. Several hours later, once night fell and the lights went out, somewhere in the city someone cornered Lloyd Dorksler, 52 years old, who began to feel very afraid. This person was none other than the nocturnal Hound Vicar. The place was filled with corpses. He drew his sword and revealed that according to the information, Lloyd was the leader of the House of Information and the director of the orphanage. He had conspired with the demon and had sold children from high-ranking families. While the Beelzebub sword was emitting an intense demonic energy, Vicar began to stare intently at Lloyd and with a piercing gaze asked him if he thought it would go unnoticed. Lloyd, who was sitting with his back against the statue, began to observe the blade of Vicar's sword, and upon seeing the solid aura it had, he quickly realized that he was a swordmaster. Upon hearing this, Vicar started looking at his sword. His aura was in quite a solid state, but it was still closer to a liquid state. To be more specific, he was at the level closest to being a graduate. He approached Lloyd and advised him to work with him to catch the demon. If he did so, he would be compensated accordingly. Just before Lloyd could make a decision, the shadow of something large appeared in the sky, preventing the moonlight from hitting Victor's mask. At that moment, half of a tower appeared right above Victor and began to descend towards them. The tower struck forcefully against the area where Lloyd was, creating a great curtain of smoke. Just before the tower could hit the ground, Victor moved back, avoiding being crushed. Once he stopped his moving body, he looked up and saw someone standing on top of the tower that had been cut in half. This man was wearing a mask made of human skins and had a staff resting on top of a bucket made of human faces. Victor started staring at him since he had the same overwhelming energy that he felt even from afar. He didn't know if this man was an elite corpse. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.